John Zimmerlee, thank you very much for taking the time to tell us about your work in relation to the missing from the Korean conflict, and also to tell us about your own situation involving your father, who is still missing from that war. I wonder if we could just start by you telling us what you feel certain that you know about your own dad's situation, about your own dad's case.
Well, the government told my mother when I was very, very young, I was only 2 years old, almost 3, that he was missing in action, and they didn't really know anything more. He was a navigator aboard a B-26, which typically has 3 crew aboard, usually a pilot, a navigator, and a gunner.
Yeah.
And that the plane went missing, and they don't know anything more. And as soon as they learn more, they will be in contact with her by phone or by letter. And I got that information very, very young, and we went back to meet with the military when I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah.
And they were telling us the same thing. As soon as we learn something, we'll be back in contact with you.
Yeah.
When I was old enough and learned from that meeting, I was out at the mailbox every day, and I was by the phone waiting to hear that information about my dad. Of course, they never called, and they never sent us anything.
This is starting around the age 5 or 6.
5 or 6, yeah.
Because that's a question. I'm sorry, I am interrupting here, but that was one of the questions I had, because your dad goes missing over North Korea, right? Over present-day North Korea, when you were 2. So obviously it doesn't register at that point. And so, one of the questions I had was, do you remember when, you kind of realized, or when it kind of sank in that, your dad had been in a war, had gone missing? Was it around the age of 5 or 6, something like that?
Yes, pretty much. It was at that point when I was beginning to socialize with other kids and beginning to get towards school and all that kind of stuff. And people in my neighborhood, I realized most everybody else had a dad, but I didn't. Mm-hmm. And so then I started asking questions, and then realized he went missing in the war.
Wow. Well, again, I haven't let you proceed, and telling us everything that you know. We'll get back to that, but that does raise another question, because now we're all these decades on. And this probably is an unanswerable question, something that can't really be put into words. But you just described yourself. You described it here, and then you describe it in writing of, going out to the mailbox, every day, waiting for that news to come, and it doesn't. And we will, talk about what you've discovered since then. But how would you describe the impact of that on a person, on you, of just living with this fact that your dad went missing, and we're still not really sure what happened? I'm just wondering, is it kind of, is it something that's always there? What is the impact of that?
Well, it's always there. You become familiar with the word orphan, and it was actually the term war orphan back then. Wow. And a number of the people from World War II experienced the same thing. So it wasn't something new to, the average American family. Mm. But it was not unique to me. I have a brother, but just grew up with not having that kind of influence around. I had a wonderful, loving mother. And eventually she remarried, and I had a very interesting stepfather, had a great childhood. But there was always that link, that missing father. Why? And the things that I heard about him, he was so excited when he got married to have his first son. Mm-hmm. And then when my mother got pregnant again, he had a second son, and he was so delighted. And then then 2 years later, he gets called up. Now, he did serve in World War II. He was aboard a larger plane in World War II. And anyway, there was an incident in World War II in the Sea of Japan that, I think it was Caesar, not sure, maybe it was Adriatic, I'm sorry, whatever. A plane went down. It was shot down, and bodies were falling out of the plane. This plane went down, bodies were falling out of the sky. There was a Navy ship down below. The Navy ship went around and collected all the bodies, put them in bags, and put them on the deck. And the captain said, did you check each one of those to make sure they weren't still alive? And some of the crew members looked kind of suspicious, and they went around, and they did. And most all of the 10 or 11 of them were dead except one.
Wow.
And they resuscitated him, and that was my father. That was from World War II.
Wow. Wow.
And so he had some skull damage and whatnot, but his brain was still functioning. Anyway, so World War II ended shortly thereafter. He was back in Atlanta going to school at Georgia Tech, and he met my mother. And she was that person in life for him. He realized it right away. And so they started dating and eventually got married. She was quite young at the time. And a year or so later, they had their first son, which is my brother. And then 2 years or 3 years, 2.5 years later, they had me. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, he got called back into service. Nobody's ever made that clear. Typically, if you were in a war and you were signed up for 3 or 4 years or whatever, and the war ended, they put you in the reserves for a period of time until your dedication is over.
Yeah.
For some reason, he was still in the reserves, and I guess maybe it was a financial thing. I don't know. But they recalled him, and I can't imagine a man married to a woman and having 2 children and as dedicated and loving as he was to his children and as excited as he was about being a father and all that kind of stuff, that he would remain a reservist. Have never figured that out. But anyway, he got recalled into service.
Yeah.
He got recalled in December, and he went missing in March. Okay, that quick.
Wow.
So it was pretty devastating for the entire family. My mother was still young. She had not really experienced any kind of working habits and whatnot. So she hadn't even got a high school degree, and so she was struggling. So we were all struggling. But anyway, she managed to deal with life, and I'm real proud of my mother, and she's one of the most outstanding people that I've ever known.
Wow.
And so she was a great mother to me.
Yeah.
Then, of course, later on, when I was, I guess it was 25 years ago, 1995, I got a postcard in the mail from the government saying that they were going to establish a new department, a new agency, and going to investigate all these guys that are missing. And they wanted to know if I wanted to know more about my father. Well, obviously, I was very excited about that. I called them up and said that, yes, I'm very interested.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I asked to meet with them, and I flew up to D.C. to meet with them, and I did. That was very depressing.
Why is that?
I met with about 12 people sitting around a table, including their attorney.
Yeah.
They were all sort of mystified as to why they were there. Nobody seemed to be leading the organization.
These are the government people who are mystified, the people who invited you to come?
This was DPMO, the Department of Missing Personnel Agency.
Sure.
Back in 1995, and it was like they had no idea what they were organized for. It was crazy. And then I asked them, I said, well, what kind of research are you doing? Where are you looking for information?
Yeah.
And they actually told me right there at the meeting with their attorney involved that research was not part of their mission. I couldn't believe it.
Okay.
And I thought, well, how are you supposed to tell me anything? He said, well, we're going to dig up the bodies that we now have, and we're going to try to look at them and see if we can determine who they are. So that's all they had in their mission, was digging up bodies. But back then, DNA analysis was not all that prevalent. So it was just beginning.
Right.
So anyway, I left that meeting and drove 11 miles over to the National Archives, where information is stored, and started doing research. And the first day I was there, it was incredible the amount of information I was finding on guys that were missing. I had a list of a number of the guys that were missing from
Yeah.
different agencies. And so I was amazed at the amount of information I was getting on some of these guys. They weren't my dad, but they were other guys. And so at that point, I realized, okay, I needed to be taking notes on everybody, not just my dad. And so I did. By the third day, I had decided my mission in life was to get information and share it with other family members, and hopefully that some of the other family members have been doing research and maybe they know something about my dad. So that was the beginning of it.
Can I ask you here, I'm linking this to the question I asked a couple minutes ago, and then as you were speaking, other questions came to my mind, and we'll see what I can remember as we go. But you just said that, this, use your word, this depressing experience with this government agency. Not a very inspiring event, obviously, for you. Although it did apparently inspire you to go do something on your own, to go to the archives, and as you describe it, you quickly began to find information, and then you said, and then you realized that this is my mission, to get information. Of course, I'm interested in getting information about my own dad, but also getting information about all these other missing. And so I want to connect that, or if there is a connection, to see if there is a connection between that and to the question of a couple minutes ago. Because obviously I have no idea, and the overwhelming majority of people have no idea what it's like to, have lived with what you've lived with, knowing that your dad was serving his country, went missing, and we just don't know. And not only do we not know, but there's the sense that the government isn't, working as hard as it can to find out, that kind of experience. And I'm just wondering about sort of the personal and psychological toll that takes on a person over time. But so the question I'm coming to then is, as you say that this becomes my mission, do you feel that this mission that you have, and I've looked at some of your work, very, very detailed, information about, different missing in Korea, has that been kind of your way of dealing with, coping with, fighting against the, just the, whatever that is you live with when you're dealing with the fact that your own dad went missing? Does that make sense? I mean, is this kind of a way for you to, to grapple with the issue in a way, in a concrete way that's helpful to other people, rather than just sort of live with it and stew with it? Does that make sense?
Well, let me back up a little bit.
Yeah.
1967, 18 years old. I'd actually taken flying lessons, and I'd actually was able to solo an airplane by myself at age 17. And about that time, I realized that not only was it a fun thing to do, but it was my mission in life. I was going to be a pilot. And so the question for me was, and incidentally, it sounds braggadocious, don't mean it to be, but I graduated a year early from high school. So I graduated at 17. And because my father had died in the military, or was in the military, I did have VA benefits for an education. So I was deciding at 17, 18 years old, I really wanted to be a pilot for a living. Well, there really wasn't any college to go to train you to be a pilot, but I wanted a college education, and I wasn't sure if going to the military was the better way to learn how to be a pilot, because obviously you'd find much better, bigger aircraft than you would be taking flying lessons in a Cessna 180. I went down to Middle Georgia to the Air Force unit down there where they train pilots. And I took their application. I took their physical. I had 20/25 vision in one eye, and so that was a little weak. And so the guy there told me to get some good rest and come back another time, spend the night before down in the place down near there, rather than driving 2 hours to get there, and I'll probably be able to pass the test. Next time I went, I did pass the test. And then I said, and because I wanted to be a pilot, he said, yes, we think you'll be qualified. You're going to have to sign up for 5 years, with the Air Force, become a pilot. And so I was given a paper. He had all the stuff in front of me, and I was ready to sign. I said, well, what happens if I accept this? I get into training. they realize my vision is only 20/25 and they don't let me be a pilot. He said, that's okay. We'll just let you be a navigator and you'll still just be in for 5 years.
Mm.
My father was a navigator. It suddenly hit me that that's probably what he did going into World War II. He thought he was going to fly.
Mm.
He got reduced to a navigator. And when I made all those mental connections at that point, I dropped the pen and started crying.
Wow.
So that's, and this sounds anti-government, but from what I've learned about my father and how much our government covers up all of this stuff, if I had gone in at that particular time, I would have been in Vietnam. I probably would have lasted less than 6 months, and my mother and my family would have to deal with it all over again, just like my father. And so that was a turning point in my life. Okay. And so from that point on, yes, I was focused on me, my family, my child, and so forth, but I always had it in the back of my mind what our government, what the military did to my father. And it was not their fault that he went missing, but it was their fault that they covered it up. So we can go back to
Yeah. No, so there are a number of things there. So just to follow up briefly on this experience that you just described, and so you realize, and so this thought strikes you, well, I may not be able to be a pilot, I'll be a navigator, and then you make all these connections. When you say you made all these connections, was part of that the realization that, you know, this life experience of yours had taken a greater toll on you than you realized? I mean, and that incident kind of brought it home that this was something that was always there, but perhaps it was more unconscious than you realized, something like that.
Well, I don't think it was, forgot what they call this, but anyway, I don't think it was something that was assumed or it was going to happen to me irregardless. It's just a coincidental that all of this thing happened, and it's coincidental, not coincidental. It's when it struck me, when I realized not only would I probably die within the next 6 months, but my mother was going to have to go through this whole thing all over again due to our government. And so even if I could take the chance myself, I couldn't have done that to her.
Yeah.
So I left that meeting, went back, took a few more tests, and went to Georgia Tech and graduated from Georgia Tech. My father, he went to Georgia Tech. So,
wow.
And so I came out of that and pursued, you know, all sorts of other things other than flying. So
yeah.
Yes, I got my pilot's license. Yes, I had my own airplane. It was a Grumman, and I had it decorated like a military plane. It had the U.S. insignia, you know, thing with the wings on the side.
Yeah.
And some other things. So it looked like a military plane, kind of in memory of my father.
Wow. I've written the word cover up there, or the phrase cover up, and we'll come back to that. I want to hear your thoughts on that. Just to kind of, you know, wrap up where we began, and then to continue from there. So you know for sure your dad was he was a navigator on a B-26. Just real quick, what was the basic mission of a B-26 in the Korean conflict?
Well, it was a small aircraft. It was one that was used in World War II. It was more of a gunner plane. It did have the capability with 10 bombs aboard, so it could drop bombs, but it was primarily a gunner plane. It had 50 caliber machine guns on the nose and on the wings.
So defense for bombers kind of thing?
It's a light bomber, they called it.
Okay, I see, yeah.
Yeah, so it had the ability to bomb and strafe and shoot other planes in the sky, that sort of thing.
I see. So you know for sure he was a navigator. You know for sure he was on a B-26. You know for sure he went down in present-day North Korea. What else do you know? Do you feel that you know for certain?
He took training as a shore-end navigator, and the shore-end was the newer type of technology for navigation and allowed them to fly at night. Most people think, good grief, you know, but literally in World War II, they were always flying in the daylight, and only in the Korean War did they start flying at night. So I knew that he was a navigator qualified to help or to work at night on this plane. The novelty about this particular aircraft, it was designed only for 3 people. It was the pilot, the navigator, and a gunner. There was a little bicycle fold-down seat in the cockpit for yet another person if somebody were there in training or observation or whatever. So there were enough, even though it was temporary seating, for 4 people. But there were 5 people aboard this plane, and 3 of them were navigators. Now, if you're in training to be a navigator, you're obviously going to go on a plane where there's a navigator to kind of give you the insight of what's going on. But why 3 navigators aboard one airplane? No one has ever been able to answer that for me.
Have you come up with, a hypothesis that at least seems plausible in your own mind?
Well, there was evidence in some of the files I found in the Air Force records, I found them myself, that there was a secret mission on that particular night. And another file I also found that they were what they call a leaflet mission. These are actually pieces of paper with information, bad things about your government, that they were dropping in North Korea for the citizens of North Korea to read.
Okay, yeah. Sort of psychological operations kind of stuff.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But to this day, I don't know if that was the mission he was on or if it was another secret mission, but I do know that there were 3 navigators aboard and they were flying at night, and no one has ever explained that to me. Now, there are, I would say, probably 30 to 40 still classified documents in the Air Force records regarding that particular unit and those particular dates, 2 or 3 dates. They're still classified. Now, why are 67-year-old documents still classified?
That's what I was going to ask. Do you think it has something to do with U.S. North Korea? Well, to the extent that U.S. and North Korea have relations, do you think it might be related to that somehow? Or?
Well, the only, and if you look at the executive orders, 13598, and there's 5 of them that are relevant to this. And all of them say that these records should have been declassified after 15 years, after 25 years, after 50 years. But then there's 5 or 6 reasons that you can still keep them classified. And some of those are, okay, this is a quote or related to an individual from another country, and therefore we can't mention their names. Okay, well, they could black that out, their names. I don't care what their names are.
Yeah.
If it's something to do with nuclear warfare or whatnot that might reveal something technical, then you can't. And if you look at the list of the items, there's all kinds of ways that they could still release those documents and wipe those things out.
Yeah.
So there's really no reason for them not to declassify the documents. Now, some of them they did claim to declassify, but oddly enough, they're lost. Go to the National Archives, documents been declassified. This is what I'm requesting. Give them exactly the location, exactly the document, and they claim they cannot find them. Okay? That's what's happening at our National Archives. You would think the National Archives would be a sophisticated library like your common county library. They don't actually monitor and record the relationships of different documents there. If you know that you want Air Force Record Group 171, and you know that you want this particular box and whatnot, then they can pull it. But they don't give you any way to find what's in those boxes at that particular location. It is ridiculous. So I spent most of my time just starting with a record group, ordering all the boxes that they have, going through page by page by page. And literally I would read or look at 1,000 documents before I would find one relative. And every now and then you'd find 4 or 5 documents in these massive, pretty much worthless records that our DPAA, today's organization, has just missed, or they never go to the archives and look through these documents, and none of their other associated researchers look through these documents one by one. They just assume that they're all garbage, and somehow accidentally somebody put something in there of interest. They actually misfiled it, and I'm finding it. That's the way I find these records. So it's thousands of hours of wasted time in order to have 15 minutes of valuable stuff.
Something productive.
Yeah.
I want to come back to that. Let's so your dad was shot down. You know he was, or you don't know he was shot down. Do you know he was shot down, or was it perhaps mechanical failure? Do you
have no idea.
You don't know. You don't know that.
No.
Do you know roughly over what part of North Korea?
Well, they call it the upper half of Green 7, and if you find the maps, they actually had some routes, combat routes that they actually marked. Some of them in yellow, some of them in green, just, with markers. And if you notice Green 7, it is northeast of Pyongyang, and it goes up to, can't think of the name of the town, but anyway, and I actually found a map that was marked Green 7. It took me about 15 years to find one of those, but I actually found Green 7 on a map. So it obviously made a lot of sense.
So somewhere in that, probably somewhere in that area then.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Now, and he had, his pilot had communication with another pilot of another B-26 in that general area. And my father's plane's pilot said that they had left the area they were originally assigned to because it was bad weather, and that they had repositioned themselves on the upper half of Green 7. And that was the last communication, and so that was about 9 o'clock at night. So we don't know exactly what happened from there. They could have turned around and gone the other direction. Who knows when they eventually went down. No one knows when they actually went down because it was not an emergency call from the plane.
And what day was this?
This was in March of 1952.
March of 52. Okay. Did the plane fly from present-day South Korea? Was that its?
Yes. They started in Busan, which is the south tip, and they were.
That's a pretty long flight then. I imagine that's.
I'm sorry.
That's a pretty long flight then, huh? From.
Oh yes. Well, there were like 5 different bases. They happened to be at what was known as K9, like the dog. And so they were at that location, and certain types of aircraft were usually concentrated at certain airports.
I see.
Anyway, that's where they were flying from.
Yeah.
I don't know where their original mission was, but they said that the weather was bad there, so they changed to another position.
So roughly where the communication from, where the last communication from the plane come. You don't know whether it was shut down. You don't know whether there's mechanical failure. I'm guessing then from there you don't know, I mean, you wouldn't know about whether your dad bailed out, whether he was captured. Do you have any kind of inklings about any of that stuff? Was your dad captured or anything?
Well, the Air Force and the DPMO at the time said there's no further information. It was at that point in 1995, after I was disappointed with all that stuff, that I started doing some research and learned that there were another group, family members out west in Texas, I think. And so I called that lady, Pat Duncan, and I said, I've been told by the government there's no further information on my father. And I said, is it possible that you people know something that they don't know? And they said, what's your father's name? And I told her. She didn't have anything on that. And she said, well, do you have any of the other crew members' names? And I said, well, actually I do. One of the documents they gave me in my father's file accidentally mentioned the other crew members. Not that they were expounding on the other crew members, it just happened to mention them. So I read off the names to her. And out of those 5 names, one of them, she said, had information on it. And she said, yes, I know something about this particular individual. He's the gunner. And he said there was a document produced on 137 different guys back in 1963. And he happened to be one of the ones that were mentioned in that document. And she started reading it to me. And again, it said that they'd gone out on a night mission. The last communication was the upper half of Green 7. They don't really know what happened. They had some other men that were in B-26s made an assumption, that maybe they crashed into a mountain because there was some bad weather and whatnot. But one of the people that I talked to, one of the veterans from the Korean War, one of the pilots, said, basically, for every man who was married aboard the plane, we increased our altitude by 1,000 feet. He said it was very unlikely that anybody in a B-26 was flying low enough to crash into a mountain in bad weather. He said, just any idiot, not even a pilot, would not fly that low.
Sure.
So anyway, And then, so she started reading this document to me, and it was 1963. And one of the other things that was in that document, it said that another document that they had run across actually mentions that a B-26 had gone down in mid-March in that area, general area, and that they had interviewed a North Korean farmer that they had captured or talked to or whatever on the ground, and asking him about things that he had seen. And this farmer said that he'd heard back in mid-March 1952 that a twin-engine bomber had gone down near where he was, and that he heard that 4 men had bailed out of the plane. Of course, there were 5 men aboard, so 4 men still makes sense. One of them's parachute didn't open, and the other 3 were on the ground. So anyway, then later that same day, he was going back to his farm, and he actually witnessed 3 Caucasian men about the age of 30, which fits my dad and the pilot and the other navigators, being marched past his farm. They were dressed in clothing with zippers on their pants legs. Well, anybody knows anything about aviators back in World War II and Korea, they had zippers on their pants legs because they were sitting down in the cockpit and they had to get into their pants leg with some pocket, and that's a convenient place to put it as a pilot. So the only people who have zippers on their pants legs are aviators. Okay. So he actually witnessed these 3 guys being marched past his farm under North Korean and Chinese escorts carrying Russian weapons. Okay. So that was confirmation that not only were the Chinese involved, but also the Russians, and they were involved in starting the war. And that these guys were being marched toward Pyongyang. So if you look at all of the guys missing, all of the B-26s that are missing, those are the twin-engine planes, twin-engine bombers that went down. The larger planes were 4-inch. So anyway, if you look at the dates and the conditions and the number of people, guess how many flights actually meet that? 1.
Really?
Yes. And so that's a logical synopsis. Now, when she gave me that information, I contacted the military immediately and said, you guys didn't tell me anything about this document. And this was a summary that this lady was reading to me. It was part of another document. Yet she didn't actually have the actual report, just a summary of that report. So I contacted the Air Force and I said, I know this document now exists. Another family member has read a portion of it. I want that document. Well, that went on from the Air Force up to DPMO, which was DPAA back then, or is DPAA now. It was DPMO back then. And so I requested that document. A year later, I got a letter from the person that's the family contact with the DPMO, and his letter said, we've investigated all the libraries, all of the airport facilities across the nation, National Archives, and every other place we could possibly imagine trying to find this document, and it does not exist. Okay?
But this is a document that the lady you were talking to had in her hand, right?
No, she had a summary.
She had a summary.
Of the document. Okay. And so I asked for that particular document, but I could not give them the reference number to that document, but it was of a document, and so I said, this is what I want. And so later on, I was actually doing research on another family member's missing man, and turned out that they had reference to the same thing, but it didn't really fit their case, but they did talk about it in his review, and they actually gave the reference number to it. So that's when I contacted DPMO, told them actually the reference number. I said, this is it. I want you to go find it. I want you to send it to me, blah, blah, blah. It took them a year. Actually sent me a formal letter saying that it does not exist. Checked all of the files, all of the libraries, everything, even the National Archives. It does not exist. Well, by that time, I'd had a contact at the National Archives, so I called him up and I said, hey, I just got this letter from this guy. He said, it's gone through all this and it doesn't exist anywhere. And I said, so I know it doesn't exist where you are. but is there any place else in the world that you could recommend that I might be able to find this document?
Yeah.
He said, I don't remember them ever calling me about this document. What document are you talking about? So I gave him the reference number. And he said, really? He said, give me just a minute. He put the phone down. I waited 2 minutes and he came back. He said, okay, I've got it. I said, wait a minute. DPMAA or DPMO said you wasn't there at your facility. I said, I don't need the summary. I've already got that. I really need the actual document. He said, I got it. It's right here in my hand. It's KT 3458. I said, really? I said, can you tell me anything more about the document? He said, and he went on to read some more of it to me that was not the summary. He said, yeah, it's right here. I got it for you. I said, well, this is Friday. Can I come on Monday and get it from you? And he said, you just want the one document? Or you want the whole box? I said, what else is in the box? He said, oh, other live sightings of Americans in the Korean War. And I said, my God. I said, I'll be there on Monday. You know, make sure you hold it for me, make sure you have it ready. Then he said, do you want the one box or all 30? There are 3,000 documents indicating live sightings of Americans during the Korean War, and they have never, ever shared it with the family members. My brother and I went up there and we spent 2 weeks copying. This was back when you had photocopies, not electronic scanning. And we photocopied almost 3,000 documents.
What year was this?
This was 1995, I think. Yeah. Yep.
So you're describing, if I have you right, you're describing 3,000 documents, and in 1995 there are going to be a lot more family members alive.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah, it can be, you know, because we've moved on in time now. 1995, a lot more family members alive, with an interest in, you know, what happened to our loved one in Korea. 3,000 documents that would be relevant to a lot of those folks. But the responsible agency and the government apparently didn't know about them, hadn't looked for them. What's your explanation as to, you know, this apparent lapse, if that's the right word?
At the end of the war, Eisenhower, the Korean War was actually a ceasefire agreement.
Right. Yeah.
In 1953, he had to make a decision. He wanted to do a ceasefire so that the war would stop, so we would stop losing people. But he had to make a decision at that particular point, what to do about the guys that we knew that were still missing and probably, and in some cases, understandably or notably, captured. And so what do? Do you admit that? If you admitted that you know all these guys are captured, you know the family members would not allow this thing to stop. They would demand, obviously, we get our family members back, especially if they're alive.
Sure.
And so he had to make the decision to stop the war and cover it up. Now, I've always felt positively angry at this man. But if you think about being in that position, do you lose more people and let them die? Or do you cover up the guys that are still missing, you know? It's a hard decision to make. And I'm sure there was a lot more factors in that. And at this point, I don't pretend to know what the best decision is going to be.
Yeah.
Obviously, for my father, I would have liked to have had him back, not to know that we've even gotten him back. But anyway, so that was what was happening then. And then, so when I got to the point where I realized all of these documents were there, and I went up and copied all of these documents and realized that there were information about these live guys, or some of them dead, but they were captured and what happened to them, I felt it was my obligation. Nobody else was going to do it. I had to take it upon myself to try to get this information to the family members.
Yeah.
When I first started this, there were 8,177 guys still missing from the Korean War. Okay, bodies had not been returned. About half of them were labeled MIAs. About a fourth of them were labeled POWs. And the only reason that they labeled them POWs is because they were actually on Chinese film and whatnot. And there were records of them being interviewed on TV and so forth. And so they couldn't deny that they were POWs. Another 25% of them were labeled killed in action, and that was a convenience because people just say, okay, he's dead, I'm letting him go. The fact of the matter is, out of the 8,177 MIA, POW, and KIAs, I had learned that 3,400 of them were actually POWs. Of the MIAs and KIAs, I've noted that 3,400 of them were actually POWs. So if you look at the actual numbers, that's a huge amount of the guys that were still missing that were not labeled POWs that I learned were actually POWs. And in some cases, I learned exactly how they died. Some of them were murdered, just lined up on the wall and shot. Some of them were actually tortured. And so some of the family members aren't anxious to hear that. So that's part of the challenge as to how you figure out what the family members want to learn, you know. And if they just want to know he's dead, then that was my mission to let them know that. If they really wanted all the details, I kind of had to prep them to say, learning all the details can be horrific. You may not be prepared for that. So those were some of the challenges involved. But out of those 3,400 MIA, KIAs that I know were POWs, I've only been able to contact about half of them, about 1,700. And the other 1,700 I don't have family contacts for. And it would be nice if DPAA would give me family contacts because they have them, or that they would work with me and pass along the information that I have to the family members. And they won't do that either. And so that's the real dilemma. And so I'm and they call me a lobbyist, and they have a bunch of nicknames for me, trying to discourage the family members from being in contact with me.
It says here you're founder and executive director of the Korean War POW MIA Network. This is the organization you're talking about that you put together to do this. Let me backtrack just a little bit, and then I want to pick up on where we just were. President Eisenhower's decision at the end of the war, and this is an honest question, because I don't know, is it your assessment that is this what you were suggesting? President Eisenhower wanted to stop the fighting. We don't have a formal end of the war, but stop the fighting. And if the issue of prisoners of war was pressed, then we wouldn't be able to stop the fighting. Is that what you're saying? And so, in other words, in order to get the fighting stopped, then we're going to leave the prisoner of war issue alone, and to say, look, we'll just leave those. And is that what you're saying, or?
At the end of the war, we had what was called Big Switch, and a number of the guys who were in POW camps were actually released just after the end of the war. And everybody was waiting to see that their family member was going to come home.
Yeah.
And when they finished the Big Switch, of course, not all of our guys did come home. And so then they produced a list of 944 guys that were assumed to be POWs, but they assumed also that they died as POWs. And so they kept trying to push the message to the family members that all of these guys are dead. There's nobody still alive in captivity in North Korea, in China, in Russia. And that was the message they were conveying. But I have hard evidence that was a total lie.
And the reason they were conveying that message, this is the question again, not a statement, a question. The reason they're conveying that message is because the underlying motivation is just to put this thing behind us and move on. Well,
as a family member, if I had learned that my father was a POW, that he was still in a North Korean camp or in Chinese camp, and Eisenhower says we're going to end the war and forget about the POWs, I would have been going to Washington and going for his throat. Okay, and so, and obviously I was only a kid at the time. But the point is that most family members would not have accepted that. You're going to stay in the war. We're going to finish this thing, and you're going to bring my family member home, or I'm going to sue you, or I'm going to rip your throat. And so,
Right. So your assessment is, from the government's point of view, to avoid that, we're just going to say it's done, and
Cover it up.
And that's covered up.
Cover it all up.
So what is your, I mean, what's your, I'm a little mystified by the situation you described where you hear from the DPMO, an agency that doesn't exist any longer, Defense POW Missing Personnel Office, right? But basically responsible for finding MIA, missing in action. They say this document doesn't exist, and this document you were talking about the live sightings, you hear from them this document doesn't exist, and I gather from what you said they weren't aware that these 3,000 documents existed.
I don't know if they're not aware or not admitting it, but it's my guess.
Yeah.
They were only 11 miles away from the National Archives. They never spend any time there. And so I'm under the impression that even though it was 11 miles away and they have a $150 million budget to give us the fullest possible accounting of our missing servicemen, they never go over there and do any research. They never ask the basic questions, the obvious questions. So
multiple times you've kind of come back to this theme of trying to think of a word that's a little less, not as tough as this one, but the word I have in my mind is malfeasance. I mean, this is the word, and I'm not asserting that. I'm just interpreting what you're saying. And I have heard such things before. Now, it's a little bit jarring because I have spent time with folks involved in this project and of, trying to find missing. And, I've walked away from those interactions, really impressed by what I've experienced with those folks and hearing from those folks. At the same time, I've heard folks relate things like what you've related. And so there's obviously something there.
Well, let me add, if you don't mind, I'll talk about a slightly different.
Sure.
There were more than 800 remains buried in the National Cemetery in Hawaii.
The punch bowl there?
Of people that were involved in the Korean War, and there was not enough evidence back in 1953 to identify them completely. And so they buried them as unknowns.
Yeah.
One of the problems is back then they used formaldehyde to preserve the bodies before they buried them. And ironically, or whatever, unfortunately, the formaldehyde actually makes the DNA analysis more difficult. And so they've used that as the excuse all these years of why they were not digging them up. So another researcher who does information on World War II actually sued our government to get the bodies in the punch bowl in Hawaii disinterred for World War II. And in addition to that, he was suing them to get the forensic files on each one of those. It took years for his legal action to take effect, and they finally did turn over all of the forensic files to him.
Yeah.
And like our inefficient, idiotic government, they accidentally sent to him, in addition to the World War II, they sent him the Korean War files, forensic files on the unidentified remains.
Yeah.
So, fortunately enough, he sent them to me. I started going through them one by one. I've been doing that over the years. It's amazing to me how confident they were in a lot of cases that a particular remains was an individual. Not actually positively identified, but he went missing in a particular location and the body was found there. He was particular nationality and, that was what the body was done. Mildred Trotter, who's a scientist, created a technique of measuring the tibia and the leg bones to determine how high a person, how tall he actually was. And so they used that information and had an estimated height.
Yeah.
And because of the maturity of the bones, they could actually estimate the age. So in all of those, just about all of them that at least had leg bones there, they were able to determine the nationality the height and the age of the person.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, you find the unit where the body was found and estimated how long ago the body was actually buried, in other words, about the time that it was the guy died. You can really go through the database, because I have, today's world we have electronic databases. And you can pretty much identify within 4 or 5 guys who that guy is. And so I started collecting this information, and of those people, the family members that I had contact, I started sending the information, the forensic file to them that was most closely identified as their particular missing loved one. And so I was sending those to the families with the instruction to them to send this to DPAA and to the Army and so forth and request the disinterment from the graves in Hawaii for this particular remains, because you feel like almost certainly that it's that particular family member. Well, there was actually a process years ago for that to happen, but you had to have compelling evidence that it was your particular guy. Well, I happened to have the compelling evidence and finally got it to the family members, and so they were able to do it. And so it was not violating a system that they had established. It was a system they established that they never expected anybody to be able to qualify for. And so all of a sudden they were getting hundreds, literally hundreds of requests from my sending all the information to them, getting back to DPMO and whatnot. And so they finally decided to start digging them all up. Okay, now that sounds braggadocious again, but I've been told by one of the forensic scientists that worked at JPAC, which was their lab in Hawaii, that the reason they started digging them up is because I'm the one that forced all the family members, not forced them, encouraged them to do this, and that they had all this paperwork coming through, and the amount of paperwork and processing they had to do was easier for the government to do. And so they have been. And they have 7 phases that they're going to go through for all 800 remains, and they've gone through phase 2. They stopped doing that almost a year ago. And so they've got 2/7 of the guys dug out of the ground, and they stopped doing it. Meanwhile, in the last 6 months, because of the coronavirus, they have stopped doing their disinterments and their field activities in the different countries around the world because they weren't allowed in there to do that.
Right.
My question in a conference call recently, well, if you have all these people standing by that can no longer go out and do all of this research in the field and digging up bodies in other countries for different wars, why don't you take them over to the Punch Bowl, to the cemetery in Hawaii, and dig up those remains? It's isolated, it's in our country. What's the problem?
Sure.
And they've answered with, oh no. So anyway, been going through all that. But yes, it's been rewarding to some degree, but I don't think I'm going to live long enough to actually see all of the results.
Well, I mean, I do encourage folks to, I just put your name, John Zimmerlee, into Google and immediately got at least a glimpse into some of the detailed work that you've done, which is very important. And it actually, it is a person at the DPAA who connected, you to me. So, your importance, as part of this unfolding story, is certainly is recognized. Let me ask you this. I've got just a couple more questions in my head, and then we'll see where things go, although we probably should begin to wind down. One of the things that as I've heard you talk, as I've talked to others who express kind of similar feelings of frustration, for some reason, I would have thought that of all the government projects, of all the projects the government is doing, I mean, this is the one where, everyone involved would be absolutely mission focused, zeroed in, and just gung-ho every day, right? Understanding, I mean, stuff happens in life, but I would just assume that you're going to be working with folks who are absolutely mission focused, Johnny on the spot, getting it done as expeditiously and as professionally as possible, but getting it done. It sounds like, given the frustrations that you've expressed, given similar frustrations I've heard from other folks who are also prominent when it comes to this question. How do you explain that? I think most Americans would agree that this is an issue. This is a topic. This is a theme where there shouldn't be this kind of frustration, right? Does that make sense at all? I mean, how do you explain it? I just think a lot of Americans would be kind of mystified if they heard about how frustrating this is for family members who are trying to figure out what's going on. Do you have any, what's your sense of what accounts for that? Or what let's put it in the past tense, at least up to now, what has accounted for that?
You have an organization and you've created it because you have a passion for it. I got thrown into this because I'm missing my dad. So you and I are personally motivated to do what we do. And most people in businesses, no matter what it is, have a passion for the concept and whatnot. They really want to do that. In the military and in the government, if you've been occupied in a particular job and you want an increase in your retirement, you can stay on in some of these entities like DPAA, spend a couple of years and you can increase your retirement and your benefits and all that kind of stuff. And so there are some reasons that people in government shift over to this kind of organization. But part of DPAA is a lab in Hawaii. It was actually run by somebody who had no forensic scientific training at all. I mean, the concepts just don't make any sense.
This is in the past.
Yeah, and the person who was running that organization, that lab, 4 years ago, it was 4 years ago, they determined there was a scientist who was actually hired to do a review, and he was very critical of the entire organization over there. After his report came out, there were so many people who were upset that they actually pulled down not only the lab out there, but the entire DPMO. It was out of business, completely shut down, in revision mode for 2 years. And when it came back up, guess who was running it? Same people.
Mm.
Okay?
Mm.
So even with all the embarrassment that you're not doing your job, they still don't do their job. They're good at spending the money, hiring people, actually encouraging and receiving a lot of activity and work from other organizations, and they pay them for it, but they're still not organized enough to get the information to the family members. And their mission statement is the fullest possible accounting of our missing servicemen. And they act like that doesn't mean anything. So in the government, you're not really motivated to do what you have a passion for or what you're assigned to do. You just get paid. At the end of the day, you go home. And so we've never really seen a passion in this organization from any of the members. None of it.
So I hear you, and I hear you. Let me just share with you my experience, and I'm just interested in hearing you respond to that. Because I did spend some time, out in Hawaii with the folks, and sort of basically learning about the organization. And I walked away. Now, of course, I'm in a very different position. I'm just, I start from I don't know anything, and now I'm in this context for a week. So it's a very limited experience. But at the end of the week, I felt really inspired, because I talked to people that seemed to be clearly, highly motivated, young folks. And you mentioned the folks who go out into the field, the folks who go out in the field and do this tedious work. And the story that most sticks in my mind is, this crew that's in Vietnam. They spend 5 weeks and they find one tooth and one medallion, if I remember correctly, but that was enough to identify. And it was very inspiring talking to that person and hearing some of these stories. So I walked away kind of inspired. I'm just wondering what your response is to that.
There are a handful of people who are extremely admirable.
Yeah.
The scientist that you and I both know, remarkable person. Okay.
Yeah.
But I've heard family members who have gone to Hawaii to visit the lab to learn more about what's going on. So they arrive at the lab to meet with people there. They arrive 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. The government meets with them, unlocks the door, turns on the lights, shows them an empty lab. So what good is the lab if there's nobody there at 11 o'clock in the morning on a weekday working? There's nobody there.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. And so why do we spend the amount of money? And you can imagine in Hawaii, limited amount of space, limited amount of people, higher cost of living. It's got to cost a remarkable amount of money to maintain labs in Hawaii. And why? We have labs in the United States. We could ship those bodies over here. We have people all around from different, groups, even volunteer groups that would be willing to look at that. But no, they decide that they've got to have labs in Hawaii and support that. Vacant labs, nobody there. That's just stupid. And so it's a misuse of funds. It's a misappropriated direction.
Yeah.
And like you say, there's a handful of people out there that are really motivated, but their bosses and the higher ups, not allowing it to really happen. So, I mean, I even went last year and had training out in the field, forensic training for digging up remains. I actually did that.
You did.
So we got trained to go in the field and and all that, and I did that to let DPAA know that I'm willing to do whatever they need to do, and if it's not necessarily going out in the field digging up, but at least being aware of the process. And so I've been continually training for everything and anything in case the need, possibility shows up. But right now, their DPAA is, I embarrassed them at a conference call a couple of 3 months ago about them not working with me, and I have all this information, and they're working with other organizations, and they're for some reason resenting me and not wanting to work with me. So they finally decided they would. Well, it's 3 months later, and they're still talking about possibly sending me a document of understanding of how to proceed forward.
Yeah.
3 months and they haven't even gotten the document to me yet, much less working with me.
Yeah.
I'm 71 years old, eventually I'm not going to be around anymore. I'd like to get all this information that I have to the family members.
Yeah.
I'm not expecting recognition. I don't need reward.
Yeah.
All I need is evidence that it eventually gets to the family members. And why would they resist doing that? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
If their mission statement is the fullest possible accounting of our missing servicemen, and I have documents that actually identify eyewitness accounts of guys that were on their or in their units and actually witnessed them die, no matter what the situation was. And that's in written documents. And sometimes they have 3 or 4 documents confirming the same thing. And you would think that they would allow those to go to the family members. Or if they don't trust me with my information, go to the National Archives 11 miles away from their office, get the same documents I have, and send them to them. But they're not motivated to go get them, not motivated to use mine, not motivated to do anything. And they're waiting to send me a memorandum of agreement so that I can eventually sign it and get it back to them, and then it'll take them months and months and months to figure out how we're going to work together. Come on. Don't need them to work with me. Just need to be able to send them the documents and give me some evidence that it got to the family member. That's it. Don't even have to mention my name.
Yeah. Well, I do, as that process, carries on, I wish the best for all of that. Let me say, again, you and I were just put in touch, I think by now, maybe 15 hours ago, something like that. So not that long ago, but just in what little I have seen, I have been impressed by the information that I've seen, information that you have. I've been impressed by by the effort you've made to, to make information available to others. And so I do appreciate that. Let me ask you one last question. This is a hypothetical, and it might be a really bad question. And if it is, feel free to say so, and then we'll just do something else. But it kind of gets back to where we were at the beginning when I asked, about the toll that it takes on the family members. I mean, one of the reasons, I think underlying your concern here is that it's not just that people want information. They want information because there's a toll that this takes on people, not knowing what happened to their family members. So we want the information, but a main reason we want the information is because it's taking a toll on people. It's taking a toll on them psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, and every other way. So just hypothetically, it's not going to happen, but just hypothetically, let's say you get a phone call this evening from the DPAA, all right, that says we have definite information and now we can tell you with a degree of certainty what happened. Now, of course, this isn't going to happen, but it's just hypothetically. And the information you heard on the phone sounded perfectly plausible and absolutely certain, and so you go to bed tonight, just in some sense thinking, okay, now I know. What difference would that make for you tomorrow, having that different information? How would tomorrow be different from right now?
And it's a very good question.
Yeah.
And yes, I've always wanted to know. And yes, I have the same reservations. Was he tortured or whatever? And I really don't want to hear that. But if that's the truth, that's really what I want to know. Okay. And I think that most of the family members share the same feeling with me. If I found out what happened to my father, the first thing I would be motivated to do is to contact the family members of the rest of the people aboard that aircraft, the other crew members, and tell them what I have learned and start aiming them to. So what you're saying, yes, it would be somewhat of a resolve to me, but it would be inspiration for me to continue on to get information to other people. And so I would use that as an instrument to continue on. And I think that these people need to know. And I think that, and I know this is not going to sound very patriotic, but anybody who is ready to sign up for the military, I think needs to hear some of these case stories and find out and know that, yes, you're proud of America. Yes, you need to serve America. But if you go missing, this could be what happens to you and your family.
It's a possibility. Yeah. Yeah. Last question. What do you think folks today should know about the war in Korea? I mean, I imagine that of course, as you're digging into all this, you're learning about the war itself. It's often referred to as the forgotten war, big World War II, controversial Vietnam, Korea kind of stuck in the middle there. What do you think? What do you think folks should know about that conflict?
Well, you mentioned the forgotten war, and at the end of the war, the government had contacted all the family members of those who didn't come back and told them that they should stop focusing on the war, stop asking questions, because if your loved one is still alive, it might inspire the enemy to go ahead and kill them. And so you need to back off and forget the war. And so that's really the reason it's been called the Forgotten War, is they wanted everybody to forget it because it really never really ended. It was a ceasefire, and there's a lot of unopened baggage there that our government didn't really want them to share. So our government was encouraging everybody to forget this war. It wasn't an automatically just forgotten war. And that held true in wars to come, Vietnam. There's been a lot of questions about whether we should have been in Vietnam, and I won't really beat that to death. But in the Korean War, after World War II, obviously we had to work with Japan and try to figure out, like we worked with Germany, And so in Japan, we wouldn't allow them to create a military anymore. So we put a military base in Japan to protect them and to guide them. And we took over pretty much all of their international interaction and guided them with that. We were in control of Japan. The logic, the understanding was that they were heavily involved in World War II, and we weren't going to let them do that again. The problem is that at the end of World War II, we realized that 50 years before that is when they took over South Korea. And they were, Japan had control over South Korea. And all of a sudden now, Japan probably shouldn't have control over South Korea. The war's over, and they shouldn't be controlling other countries. And so our initial reaction was to give Korea back to Korea. But Korea was actually guided by, Pyongyang, North Korea, and the Chinese and the Russians were in control of North Korea. So we couldn't just give back South Korea to North Korea because we'd actually be giving them to the enemies.
Right.
What was the answer to that? Well, the answer was to create a separate country. And I think his name was, I can't remember his name. Anyway, the guy that we put in control of South Korea was actually
Syngman Rhee, is that right?
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, I'm sorry, my memory's failing me.
I'm not sure either.
But anyway, he was a South Korean. He had spent a lot of his life in the United States, going to college and so forth. So he was educated in the United States, grew up in the United States. So we realized he was oriented towards the United States. So we assigned him as the leader of South Korea. And then we sent our troops over there, a very small amount of our troops over there to guide them, educate them, train them in military. Of course, there was hardly anybody in South Korea that was volunteering to be part of the military. And so that went on for a couple of years. And then in 1950, we decided to pull out of South Korea and let them do their own thing. Nice thing to do. I mean, it's logical. That'll be the new America. Well, we pulled out too soon. Yeah. And as soon as we pulled out, China and Russia realized they didn't have any defense. They had a few training, probably have a couple hundred guys, but, that's nothing. So China and Russia got together. China provided all of the military. Russia provided the planes and the weapons. And the two countries guided North Korea into going south to take over South Korea.
Right.
And that's how all that began. And of course, that began in June 1950, and it took us a couple of months. We had a few people down in Busan and so forth, and several people in Japan. So we took those guys, a couple of hundred of them from Japan, and came over and started the war to fight back.
Yeah.
So that's how it all began.
Yeah, and the story kind of continues, doesn't it? I mean, the most militarized zone in the world, the demilitarized zone there between North and South Korea, and kind of that story continues.
Well, I'm sorry, but interestingly enough, the big problem we have with North Korea now is nuclear weapons. And it amazes me that if you look at the Google Maps at night of the Korean Peninsula, and you can see all of South Korea is all lit up. All of North Korea is dark. So they don't have any money, they don't have any technology, but for some reason they're leaders in the world in nuclear weapons. And it's interesting that their nuclear facilities are right on the border with China.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's all kinds of geopolitical stuff. Who knows where it's going? The relationship with China and North Korea and all of that. Well, we use the phrase "forgotten war" in relation to Korea, and one of the reasons we need to, me as a history teacher, one of the reasons I need to push back against that and help it to be more remembered is to honor your dad. Your dad's name was also John, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
John Zimmerlee. Or I'm not John Zimmerlee. I'm sorry. To remember John Zimmerlee, to keep the memory of what he and others did. I don't know if you've been to South Korea. Have you been to South Korea?
Yes, I have. Mm-hmm.
It's a vibrant, prosperous democracy today.
And so whatever people thought about that armistice in 1953, about that being a loss, at least from the point of view of South Korea today, it doesn't look like a loss.
Yes.
And that is partly the result of, the project that your dad was part of, that this vibrant democracy is at work there in East Asia. So we appreciate him. We appreciate all those vets who served in the Korean conflict. Appreciate you and what you're doing, and looking forward to seeing where things go. And thank you very much for taking this time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for taking the time with me. I really admire what you're doing, and I think it's important that we hear the voice of the veterans like that's on your website, and to actually not share, but to appreciate their dedication and what they've given for our country.
That's right. Well, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you.